Jim Simons spent decades observing patterns in financial markets, in human behavior, in the way societies move and repeat themselves. And one of the clearest patterns he ever identified had nothing to do with stock prices. It had to do with how people think about money before they ever earn a single dollar. He noticed that the majority of people who struggle financially are not defeated by the economy. They are defeated by a loop, a self-reinforcing cycle of beliefs, decisions, and habits that keeps regenerating poverty no matter how hard someone works. He called it, in his own quiet way, a closed system with a negative output. And the first step to escaping it, he believed, was to simply recognize that the loop exists. Simons was not a man who believed in luck. He believed in edges, small, consistent, repeatable advantages that compound over time. And what he understood better than almost anyone alive was that the biggest edge a person could ever develop was not a hot stock tip or a lucky break. It was the ability to see reality clearly, without emotion, without inherited assumptions, and without the distortions that most people carry from childhood into every financial decision they ever make. Today, we are going to walk through the exact mental architecture that Simons used to think about wealth, poverty, and the invisible traps that keep brilliant people stuck. These are not motivational ideas. They are structural observations. Think of them as a diagnostic report on the human condition delivered without sentiment, because sentiment is precisely what keeps people poor. The first thing Simons observed was what he called the illusion of effort. He watched people work extraordinarily hard their entire lives and remain in financial struggle, while others worked half as hard and accumulated extraordinary wealth. The conventional response to this observation is moral. We want to believe the wealthy are lucky or corrupt or simply born into advantage. But Simons was not interested in moral narratives. He was interested in mechanisms. And the mechanism he identified was brutally simple. Hard work applied in the wrong direction does not compound. It just depletes. Think about a person rowing a boat with tremendous force, but the oars are pointed sideways. They exhaust themselves completely. They feel the strain in their muscles. They believe, sincerely, that they are working harder than anyone around them, and they are right. But the boat barely moves forward. Simons saw this pattern everywhere, not as a critique of individual people, but as a critique of the system of beliefs they had inherited. Most people are taught that effort is the primary variable in financial outcomes. Work hard enough and prosperity will follow. But Simons understood that effort is only one variable and not the most important one. Direction matters more, leverage matters more. The system you are operating inside matters more than the force you apply to it. This is why so many people in low-income environments stay in low-income environments across generations. It is not because they are not working. It is because the work they are doing, the skills they are developing, the mental models they are using, all of it was designed to keep them functional within a system that does not reward them. Schools do not teach compounding. Churches do not teach asset ownership. Parents pass down the financial logic of survival, not the financial logic of growth. And so each new generation picks up the same set of tools, applies them with great effort and sincerity, and ends up in roughly the same place. The loop is not malicious. It is simply a system operating exactly as designed. Simons' answer to this was radical in its simplicity. Before you change what you do, change how you see. Audit every belief you hold about money. Ask yourself where it came from. Ask yourself whether it is actually true or whether it is simply familiar. The moment a person begins to distinguish between what is real and what is merely inherited is the moment they step outside the loop for the first time. The second structural trap Simons identified was what he understood as the cost of thinking in straight lines. Human beings are naturally linear thinkers, We extrapolate from the present into the future in a straight line. If I earn a certain amount per hour today, I will earn slightly more per hour next year. If I save a little money each month, I will have a little more money next year. This linear thinking is not wrong, it is just catastrophically incomplete because the world does not move in straight lines, it moves in curves. And the gap between linear outcomes and exponential outcomes is quite literally the difference between poverty and wealth. Simons built his entire fortune on this insight. He did not ask, how can I earn more? He asked, how can I build a system where the output grows faster than the input? That is a completely different question, and it leads to completely different behavior. A person thinking linearly takes on more hours of work when they need more money. A person thinking in terms of curves asks what they can own that will grow while they sleep. One person is selling time. The other is buying time back through the power of compounding. There is a story not widely told about a young analyst who once presented Simons with a trading strategy that generated consistent 12% annual returns. Simons studied the numbers for a long moment and then asked one question: what does year 20 look like? The analyst had not run the projection. When they did, they discovered that 12% compounded over 20 years turned a single $100,000 into over 900,000. Simons nodded slowly and said, now you understand why patience is not a virtue. It is a calculation. That single reframing from patience as a character trait to patience as a quantitative strategy is one of the most powerful mental shifts a person can make, because it removes emotion from the equation entirely. You are not waiting because you are disciplined. You are waiting because the numbers demand it. For someone stuck in a low-income cycle, this lesson is not abstract. It is the difference between spending a small amount of money on something that depreciates and investing that same amount in something that compounds. Over a single year, the difference is small. Over 10 years, it is significant. Over 20 years, it is generational. The poverty loop is powered in large part by linear thinking applied to an exponential world. The third lesson from Simons' framework is perhaps the most uncomfortable, and it concerns the hidden tax of emotional decision-making. Simons was famously indifferent to the emotional appeal of any trade. It did not matter whether a stock felt like a winner. It did not matter whether a strategy felt wrong. What mattered was the data. What mattered was the signal. And he built an organization, Renaissance Technologies, specifically designed to remove human feeling from financial decisions, because he understood that emotion is not a guide. It is a distortion. Now, most people hear this and think it is about investing, but Simons' principle applies to every financial decision a person makes. Think about the last large purchase you made that you regret. Think about the loan you took because it felt manageable in the moment. Think about the opportunity you passed on because it felt risky, even though the actual probability of success was high. Every one of those decisions was driven by feeling rather than calculation. And over a lifetime, the cumulative cost of emotional financial decisions is staggering. There was a study conducted at a large university that tracked two groups of individuals over 15 years. The first group made financial decisions based primarily on gut feeling and social norms, what their peers were doing, what felt comfortable, what seemed culturally appropriate. The second group was trained to evaluate every financial decision using a simple framework. What is the actual probability of a positive outcome? What is the cost of being wrong? And what is the opportunity cost of not acting? At the end of 15 years, the second group had accumulated on average 4 times the net worth of the first group. They were not smarter, they were not more talented, they were simply less emotional about money. Simons would have found this result entirely predictable. The mechanism here is not complicated. Emotion responds to the present. It cannot model the future. When something feels expensive, We avoid it even if its long-term return justifies the cost. When something feels safe, we gravitate toward it, even if it is slowly eroding our financial position. The poverty loop is held together, more than anything else, by emotional logic that made sense in a context of scarcity and now actively prevents escape from it. Breaking the loop requires developing what Simons called cold clarity, the ability to evaluate a decision based on its actual expected outcome, not its emotional resonance. This does not mean becoming robotic. It means creating distance between the moment you feel something about a financial choice and the moment you act on it. It means building the habit of asking before every significant decision, if I remove how this feels, what do the numbers actually say? The fourth trap is one that Simons observed most acutely in highly intelligent people, and it is perhaps the most ironic. He called it the penalty of false precision. Simons noticed that people with sharp minds often became overconfident in their ability to predict outcomes. They would build elaborate mental models, study a situation from every angle, and arrive at a conclusion with tremendous certainty and then be completely wrong. Not because they were not intelligent, but because they confused the complexity of their analysis with the accuracy of their forecast. Intelligence without humility becomes a liability. And in financial terms, it is extraordinarily expensive. The poverty loop has a version of this trap that looks slightly different. For people without formal financial education, false precision shows up not as overconfidence in analysis, but as overconfidence in patterns. My father worked his whole life and ended up comfortable, so if I do the same, I will too. The housing market in my neighborhood always goes up. My job is stable because it has always been stable. These are patterns masquerading as predictions. And because life has always moved slowly enough that the patterns seem reliable, people bet their financial futures on its continuation. Then the world shifts, technology eliminates an entire industry, a market corrects, an economy contracts, and the pattern breaks. And there is no backup plan because the pattern was not supposed to break. Simons built his models with explicit uncertainty built in. Every trade at Renaissance Technologies carried a probability estimate, not a certainty. And crucially, the models were designed to be wrong a significant portion of the time. They simply needed to be right more often than they were wrong, and right by enough when they were right to more than compensate for the losses. This is a profoundly different relationship with uncertainty than most people have. Most people treat uncertainty as the enemy, something to be eliminated through more research, more planning, more control. Simons treated uncertainty as the terrain. You did not eliminate it. You mapped it, you priced it, and then you moved through it with calibrated confidence. For someone trying to escape a low-income cycle, this means developing a tolerance for calculated risk. It means understanding that the absence of risk is itself a risk, the risk of remaining exactly where you are. Every person who built wealth from nothing had to move through uncertainty. They did not do it blindly. They did it with their eyes open, having honestly assessed the odds, having prepared for the downside, and having decided that the expected outcome over time justified the discomfort of the present moment. That is not bravery. That is calculation. The fifth and final principle from Simon's framework is what might be called the law of asymmetric positioning. Simons understood that not all actions are equal in their long-term impact. Some decisions, correctly made, produce returns that dramatically outweigh their costs. Others, even when executed perfectly, produce returns that barely justify the effort. The key discipline is learning to tell the difference, and then concentrating your energy on the decisions that carry the highest asymmetric upside. In practical terms, this means that someone trying to escape financial struggle should not simply try to do more of everything. They should try to identify the one or two actions that, if taken consistently over time, will produce outcomes disproportionate to the effort invested. This is the logic behind skills development, specifically the acquisition of rare and valuable skills that very few people possess. It is the logic behind network building in environments where opportunity concentrates. It is the logic behind financial literacy itself, because understanding money is a skill that compounds across every other decision you will ever make, which means its return on investment is almost incalculably high. Simons himself demonstrated this principle through his career. He did not try to be competent at everything. He identified the specific intellectual territory where he had an edge, the detection of non-obvious patterns in large data sets, and he concentrated his entire professional energy there. He did not diversify his effort. He focused it. And the compounding effect of that focus, applied consistently over decades, produced results that the rest of the financial world found genuinely difficult to explain. For someone in a low-income loop, asymmetric positioning means asking a different question than how can I work harder? It means asking, which one investment of time or money, if made now and held consistently, will change the trajectory of my entire financial life? It might be a specific course of study. It might be the development of a skill in a field that is growing rapidly. It might be the simple act of beginning to invest a small amount each month in an index fund at the age of 22 rather than 35, because those 13 years of compounding represent an almost unimaginable difference in outcome. The answer is different for every person, but the question is universal, and most people in the poverty loop never ask it because they are too consumed by the immediate demands of survival to look up and ask where the leverage is. This is the deepest cruelty of the poverty loop. It is self-sustaining not because it is inescapable, but because it consumes exactly the cognitive bandwidth required to see it clearly. Stress narrows focus. Scarcity narrows thinking. When you are worried about paying rent, your brain does not naturally move toward long-term strategic planning. It moves toward immediate problem solving. And so the very conditions of poverty make it harder to think your way out of poverty. Simons understood this, and his response was characteristically unsentimental. He said, in effect, that the solution is not to wait for conditions to improve before thinking clearly. The solution is to carve out, by force of discipline, small windows of clarity even within difficult circumstances, and use those windows to make the single highest leverage decision available to you in that moment. Not 10 decisions, one, the best one. Then repeat. Over time, each high leverage decision creates slightly more breathing room, slightly more space for the next decision. The loop does not break all at once. It unravels one deliberate, calculated, emotionless choice at a time. Now, before we close, we want to hear from you. If this video gave you something real to work with, leave a comment below and write one sentence describing how you are going to apply one of these lessons to your financial life starting this week. Not a vague intention. One specific sentence. Because clarity is the beginning of execution, and execution is the only thing that actually changes outcomes. And if this kind of thinking is useful to you, like this video, it tells us to keep making content that respects your intelligence and gives you tools you can actually use. Here is the summary of what Simon's framework tells us about escaping the poverty loop. First, effort applied in the wrong direction does not compound, it only depletes. You must audit the direction before you increase the force. Second, the world moves in curves, not straight lines, and the difference between linear thinking and exponential thinking is, over time, the difference between financial struggle and financial freedom. Third, emotional decision-making carries a hidden cost that most people never calculate. Developing cold clarity about money is not a personality trait. It is a learnable skill. Fourth, false precision, whether from overconfidence or over-reliance on familiar patterns, is a trap that catches intelligent people precisely because it feels like certainty. Embrace uncertainty as the terrain, not the enemy. And fifth, not all actions are equal. Find the asymmetric opportunity, the one investment of time, skill, or capital that produces returns disproportionate to its cost, and concentrate your energy there without apology. Simons did not build one of the most successful investment operations in history by working harder than everyone else. He built it by seeing more clearly than everyone else. And clarity, unlike capital, is available to anyone willing to develop it. The poverty loop is not a life sentence. It is a system, and every system, once understood, can be changed. The question is not whether you are capable of escaping it. The question is whether you are willing to think differently enough to begin